We're structured a little differently than a lot of utilities are. We've got the drinking water plant at one end and then the water pollution control facility at the other end. Having a joint water wastewater utility does make it easier to look at things we're doing in the watershed through the lens of both source water protection and wastewater discharges. It's all going into the same watershed. And so just having that combined focus, our staff engineers who work in both facilities are able to think about the needs of both of the utilities simultaneously when they're looking at doing things in the watershed. We're a 100% groundwater system on a pretty small watershed. And what that means is we're susceptible to impacts of both drought and floods. And it's part of being a river community, but it is something that we have to deal with. So that's what's really pushing us on the drinking water side. On the wastewater side, since the facility came online, it's never had a violation. And it's really good at treating the things it's designed to treat. Nutrients were not one of the things it was designed to treat. When we're talking about improvements that could happen to the wastewater facility itself, that's a very heavy equipment process focus. We're looking at equipment, technology changes in the way that we're treating the wastewater. It also tends to be very energy intensive to try to tackle things inside the facility. If we're looking outside the fence, that's when we're looking at more natural solutions. You're trying to address things in the watershed at watershed scales. And that's a completely different paradigm for what wastewater folks have considered as their role. As a combined utility, as we're doing projects, we're looking at so many different benefits. It's true that everybody lives downstream. We've got wastewater facilities upstream that are impacting the source water coming to us. At the same time, what's leaving in the effluent of our wastewater facility is going into receiving waters that somebody else downstream is going to use. And because of that, when we started talking about doing nutrient reduction projects in the watershed, we were looking at projects that would not just tackle nutrients, but we were looking at projects where we could stack other types of benefits as well. So source water protection is a big one, but there's also aquatic habitation restoration, recreational opportunities, hunting opportunities, all of these different types of things. And that was actually a part of the sales pitch when we sold this to our city council, was that, yeah, the wastewater utility is putting out a couple $100,000 a year to invest in the watershed, but you're getting more than just nutrients out of it. You're getting all of these other things. Flood mitigation is a huge concern in Ames. And as we're doing projects up in the watershed to treat the water, that by its nature has a positive impact on flood mitigation. And so it's coupling all of those benefits together is what we're really trying to go after. Working in both water and wastewater, it's very obvious that there's just one water. There's not drinking water and storm water and wastewater. There's one water, and it's all got to be thought about holistically. We need to design systems that are respectful of the multiple needs of water for drinking, for recreation, for aquatic life. That's really got to be at the forefront of what we're doing. This project that we're standing here with is a great example of thinking about multiple needs when trying to address a project in a watershed. This is a lowhead dam that was constructed for source water augmentation during periods of drought. We had a conversation with a local recreation group, the Skunk River Paddlers, and they came with this vision of doing something that would create a recreational opportunity. They said, if you're going to do something in the river, let's do something in the river. We started some conversations with the Iowa DNR, and they said, could we put a fish ladder in here as well? And so if you look at what's in the channel now, you can see that there's on the east side of it, there's a series of larger pools that are designed for kayakers and paddlers. And then on the other side of it, there's more weirs, really only about 8 inches high, so that fish can migrate upstream. So as we were doing that, though, we had to get a Corps permit because we're doing work in the river, and that required us to lay back the banks and into North River Valley Park here. And so in conversations with our parks folks, they said, well, let's do something on the bank side then. Let's turn it into more than just an in-water amenity. Let's do stuff on the water's edge. And so we've got these walking paths that allow, folks to get right down to the water. It's really turned it into a nice amenity here. This is the place everybody comes on a Saturday afternoon to sit and eat their lunch. Really has become a jewel of this park. The lesson we learned that I would share with other utilities, you need to find partners because they will help you find other ways to stack benefits one on top of the other on top of the other. We're doing projects and partnerships with organizations that we've never worked with in the past. And in addition to bringing all those perspectives and ideas, they're going to bring technical resources, and sometimes they're even going to bring a little bit of money to help you make projects happen. And so that would be my advice. If you're doing stuff in the watershed, go after all those multiple entities and try to get as many benefits stacked one on top of the other as you can. Really, the start of our focus in the watershed came as we were talking with our city council about it and explaining to them that we're going to spend $40 million at our facility, but if something else doesn't happen in the watershed, you're not going to be able to tell that we did something at our facility. That it's really got to be a watershed scale change that happens. So we've been in conversations with our Parks and Recreation folks, with our Public Works folks to collaborate more with them. And so that was the first thing. We had to take care of our own business before we could start up in the watershed. The other thing that came out of that notion is we don't have a lot of credibility to go up and start knocking on farmers' doors and talking to them about these things. And so we started looking for partners that could help us bring the credibility, bring the technical expertise, and that's where some of those partnerships have come in. Trying to build those types of collaborations is the route that we're taking as we try to develop relationships with landowners and farmers. When you start dealing in the watershed, year-to-year weather variations makes it so tough to know whether you're making progress or not. And the time horizon for planning and tracking and monitoring, it just stretches out. And it can be a little frustrating at first because it's hard to know whether you're really making a difference or not. But you just have to trust that if you're continuing to do the right things, it's a bunch of little individual steps that over time are going to add up to the journey. Nobody quite knows where it's going to go. They know when they started, but it is kind of neat that you're starting to see some momentum behind some projects now and things happening in multiple watersheds across Iowa. When the nutrient reduction strategy first came out, I was not a fan of the approaches that were being taken, of the fact that one side of the problem was a completely voluntary approach and the other side was being pushed. Slowly my mindset has kind of changed to say, well, okay, if we're going to do this, let's use those dollars and the platform that it provides us to make a push and actually try to make something happen with water quality in the state. And I do think that there's a critical mass building behind that on the wastewater side, and we're starting to feel some traction from the non-point sources who recognize that there's a benefit to them as well to partner up with us. I think one of the things that's really helping to foster what's happening in Iowa is the approach that the Iowa DNR is taking with wastewater utilities, with some of these memorandum of understanding, because there was a concern that some of my policymakers expressed to me is, what if we spend our $40 million and everybody else spends their money, and in 25 years we haven't hit the goals of the strategy? Are they going to come back and tighten the screws on our point source again? And this approach, by allowing us to bank credits towards those future things, actually creates an incentive for a utility to want to go out and do things, where without it, it might have actually been a disincentive, because in my back of my mind, I might be thinking I need to leave myself a little wiggle room if the targets change. With this approach, if the targets change, what I'm doing now still gets me to that same end goal.